The crimson glow of the forbidden ritual circle painted Selene's face as she knelt beside Adrian's dying form on the battlefield. Poison coursed through his veins, turning his lips blue while enemy magic ate away at his life force. Around them, the remnants of their army held a desperate perimeter against Valdris infiltrators, but Selene saw only the man she loved slipping away. "Your Highness, stay with me," she whispered, her hands glowing with strategic magic as she traced the life transfer symbols she had memorized in secret. The ritual was forbidden for good reason. It would permanently damage her magical channels, shortening her own life to extend his. But as she watched Adrian's breathing grow shallow, the choice felt inevitable. "Selene, don't!" Adrian gasped, recognizing the ritual markings. "The cost—" "Your Highness, I would give you my very soul if you asked for it." Her voice broke as she completed the first circle, feeling her life force begin to flow into him. "Let me be the one who saves you." Adrian's eyes met hers, and for a moment she thought she saw gratitude. Then his expression shifted to something she couldn't read. Pity, perhaps, or resignation. "Then perhaps that's the problem, Selene. A soul given freely has no value to the one who receives it." The words cut deeper than the ritual's pain, but Selene pressed on. As her magical channels burned and twisted, as her future withered to extend his present, she told herself this was love, this was purpose, this was enough. 7 years later, that moment haunted every interaction between them. Selene sat in her private study, reading the intercepted letter that would destroy what remained of her world. Adrian's handwriting, usually so controlled, showed emotion only when he wrote about someone else. "My dearest Vivian, how do you love someone who exists only as your reflection? Selene shaped herself into what she thought I needed, but I don't even know who she really is anymore. With you, I can be flawed, uncertain, human. She worships the idea of me, but you see the man beneath the crown. I'm tired of being someone's god when all I want is to be someone's equal." The letter slipped from Selene's trembling fingers. 7 years of sacrifices, of political maneuvering, of literally giving her life force for his dreams, and he saw it all as worship. Worse, he was right. When had she stopped being Selene Ashworth and become merely Adrian's devoted shadow? Her damaged magical channels sparked painfully as emotions overwhelmed her control. The strategic spells that once flowed effortlessly now required tremendous effort, and under stress, they failed catastrophically. The symptoms had been worsening for months, but she had hidden them, terrified that losing her usefulness would mean losing Adrian entirely. The irony was bitter. The life transfer ritual had saved him but was slowly killing her, and he had never even needed her sacrifice. Lady Vivian's healing magic had been more than sufficient. Selene had performed a forbidden ritual, condemned herself to magical deterioration and early death, all to be redundant. The breaking point came during the Harvest Festival reception. Foreign ambassadors from 3 kingdoms had gathered to negotiate trade agreements, and Selene was responsible for the magical security barriers that would allow private conversations in a crowded ballroom. It should have been simple. Her strategic magic had coordinated far more complex spells during wartime, but as she began the incantation, her damaged channels seized. Instead of discreet privacy barriers, a massive magical wall erupted from the floor, trapping the Valdris ambassadors in an impenetrable dome. The spell, fed by her panic and pain, held for 6 hours while court mages frantically tried to dispel it. "Sister, what have you done?" Darius found her collapsed in the aftermath, magical exhaustion leaving her barely conscious. Her younger brother's face showed a mixture of fury and heartbreak as he surveyed the diplomatic disaster. "The Valdris delegation is threatening war over what they're calling a magical assassination attempt. I didn't mean to. The spell just—" Selene struggled to explain, but how could she tell him that her magic was dying because she had given too much of herself away? "You've destroyed everything Father built," Darius said, his voice breaking. 20 years of diplomatic relationships, our family's reputation, our trading partnerships, all sacrificed for your obsession with a man who looks through you like glass." The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Duke Ashworth's legacy, built on strategic thinking and careful alliances, was crumbling because his heir had lost her mind, chasing after a love that had never existed. Adrian came to see her the night before she lost consciousness for the final time. Her magical channels had finally collapsed completely, and her body was shutting down in the systematic way that affected all strategic mages who overextended their life force. She lay in her bed, feeling her heart skip beats as her damaged magic failed to sustain her basic functions. "I wanted to love you, Celine," he said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. His voice carried genuine regret, which somehow made it worse. "But you never let me see who you actually were beneath all that devotion. How do you love someone who exists only as a reflection of yourself?" "I don't know," she whispered, tasting blood. "I don't remember who I was before I loved you. I think, I think I forgot how to be a person. I only knew how to be your shadow." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentle in a way it had never been when she was healthy. "I valued your mind once, your strategic brilliance, your political instincts. You were magnificent when you trusted your own judgment. But somewhere along the way, you decided my approval was worth more than your own. Thoughts. I was so afraid you wouldn't love me if I wasn't perfect for you," Celine admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I thought if I could just be exactly what you needed, eventually you would see me the way I saw you." "But I never asked you to be perfect. I asked you to be my partner. There's a difference." Celine closed her eyes, finally understanding the tragedy she had authored. She had been so terrified of not being enough that she had become nothing at all. In trying to make herself indispensable, she had made herself invisible. "I'm sorry," she breathed and meant it. Sorry for the diplomatic crisis, sorry for her family's ruined reputation, sorry for the brilliant woman she might have been if she had learned to love herself first. Adrian stayed until she lost consciousness, and her last coherent thought was not regret, but a strange, curious relief. Finally, the exhausting performance was ending. Celine gasped awake to sunlight streaming through familiar windows, her heart racing with memories of dying that felt both distant and immediate. The calendar on her desk showed the date she would never forget. Academy entrance exam day, 7 years in the past. Her 17-year-old hands were smooth and unmarked by the magical scars that had covered them in her final days. "I remember dying," she whispered to her empty room, "but I also remember being loved by someone I've never met." The phantom memories were the strangest part. Overlaid on her authentic recollections were emotional echoes that belonged to someone else. The warmth of silver eyes looking at her with complete adoration, the feeling of being treasured not for what she could give, but for who she was. The memories had no visual clarity, just pure emotion, but they felt as real as her own experiences. When she tentatively tested her magic, expecting the familiar pain of damaged channels, power flowed through her with startling intensity. But it wasn't just her original strategic magic. Combat spells that had never worked for her before responded as if they had always been hers. Two complete magical signatures existed in the same body, which should have been impossible. Professor Aldrich's eyebrows nearly disappeared into his hairline when the Academy's assessment crystals lit up in patterns he'd never seen. "The readings show 2 complete cores in one body," he muttered, running the test 3 times. "This should be impossible. Strategic and combat magic operate on fundamentally different frequencies. They shouldn't coexist like this." "What does it mean?" Celine asked, though part of her already suspected the answer had something to do with the phantom memories and the silver-eyed figure who haunted her dreams. "It's as if you're living 2 lives simultaneously," Professor Aldrich said, making notes that would undoubtedly become Academy legend. "I've never seen anything like it." The first real test of her transformation came when Darius found her in the Academy. Library, actually reading rather than researching ways to support Adrian's ambitions. In her first life, she had barely spoken to her brother except to ask him to use his combat magic in service of her political schemes. "You're different, sister," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "You're actually here, present. Before, when we talked, you only heard what you could use to help Prince Adrian. But right now, you're looking at me like you see me." The observation made her chest tight with regret. "Tell me about your research," she said, and meant it. "The combat applications for strategic magic theory. I want to understand what you're working on." For the next hour, Darius explained his innovations with an enthusiasm she had never noticed before. His ideas were brilliant, revolutionary even, but in her first life, she had dismissed them as irrelevant to Adrian's goals. Now she found herself genuinely fascinated by the theoretical implications. "This could change everything about how we approach magical education," she said, and Darius's face lit up with surprised pleasure. "I've been trying to tell you that for 3 years," he laughed. "But you were always too busy planning Prince Adrian's next political move to listen." The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it, Selene felt something she had almost forgotten: curiosity about ideas that had nothing to do with making herself useful to someone else. The real test came when Adrian sought her out, drawn by reports of her dramatic improvement in magical assessments. She was studying in the Academy's advanced research section when he appeared, looking as perfectly princely as ever. "Selene, I heard about your remarkable test results," he said, with the easy smile that had once made her heart race. "Perhaps we could discuss how your strategic insights might complement my upcoming presentation on military reform." In her first life, she would have dropped everything, canceled her own plans, and spent the night crafting brilliant arguments she would let him present as his own ideas. Now, she looked up from her magical theory texts and felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, just a mild recognition of someone she had once known. "I'm researching, Your Highness," she said politely. "Perhaps we could discuss this another time?" Adrian's confusion was almost comical. "But surely this is more important than whatever theoretical work you're pursuing." "Actually, it's not," Selene replied, turning back to her book. "My research is quite important to me." The prince stood there for a full minute, clearly expecting her to change her mind, to apologize, to revert to the devoted supporter he had taken for granted. When she continued reading, he left with a bewildered expression that would have satisfied her if she had cared enough to enjoy it. Later that evening, alone in her dormitory room, Selene found herself laughing for the first time in years. Not the practiced, pleasing laugh she had, perfected for social situations, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of her transformation. The sound startled her. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be curious about something that had nothing to do with him," she realized aloud. The phantom emotions stirred in response to her happiness, bringing a wash of warmth that felt like approval from the mysterious silver-eyed figure. Whoever they were, wherever these emotions came from, they seemed pleased by her growth. As she prepared for sleep, Selene caught her reflection in the dormitory mirror. She looked the same as she had at 17 in her first life, but something in her eyes was completely different. The desperate hunger for validation was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that seemed to come from within rather than from external approval. "Who am I if I'm not Adrian's devoted shadow?" she asked her reflection, and for the first time, the question didn't terrify her. Tomorrow, she would continue her research, spend time with her brother, and maybe discover more about the mysterious dual nature of her magic. Tonight, she would simply exist as herself, whoever that turned out to be. The phantom emotions whispered of silver eyes and patient love, suggesting that somewhere in her future, someone was waiting who would love her not for what she could give, but for who she was becoming. The thought filled her with a hope she had never dared to feel before. The Academy's grand lecture hall buzzed with tension as Professor Whitmore opened the floor for debate on magical ethics and social reform. Celine had chosen a seat in the middle section, no longer positioning herself strategically near Adrian, but simply where she could best hear the discussion. When the professor posed the question about whether magical ability should determine social hierarchy, hands shot up around the room. Adrian stood first, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place at the top. Magic is a gift that comes with responsibility. Those blessed with greater power naturally bear greater burdens of leadership. The current system ensures that those most capable guide those who need guidance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the noble-born students, but Celine found herself unmoved by arguments that had once seemed self-evident. When the professor called for opposing viewpoints, a voice from the back cut through the comfortable consensus like a blade. With respect, Your Highness, that logic assumes magical power correlates with wisdom, compassion, or leadership ability. History suggests otherwise. Celine turned to see who had spoken and felt her breath catch. Silver eyes met hers across the lecture hall, the same silver eyes from her phantom memories. Duke Kieran Nightshade stood at the back of the room, his dark hair catching the afternoon light as he continued his argument. "Consider the mage wars of the 3rd century," Kieran said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "The most magically powerful individuals nearly destroyed the kingdom through their arrogance and inability to work together. Meanwhile, the strategic innovations that ended the conflict came from a court librarian with barely enough magic to light a candle." "You're advocating for chaos," Adrian countered, a edge creeping into his tone. "Without natural hierarchy, society would collapse into—" "I'm advocating for merit," Kieran interrupted smoothly, "for judging individuals by their contributions rather than their bloodlines or magical signatures." Celine found herself leaning forward, genuinely engaged by the debate in a way she couldn't remember feeling since childhood. When Professor Whitmore asked for additional perspectives, she surprised herself by raising her hand. "What if the current system isn't just inefficient, but actively harmful?" she said, her voice steady despite the attention suddenly focused on her. "If we assume magical power equals leadership ability, we waste the potential of everyone who doesn't fit that mold. How many brilliant minds never get the chance to contribute because they weren't born with the right magical signature?" The lecture hall fell silent. In her first life, Celine had never spoken during debates, too focused on anticipating what Adrian might need from her. Now, she continued with growing confidence. "More importantly, if we tell people their worth is determined by something they can't control, we create a society of either entitled rulers or hopeless subjects. Neither serves the kingdom well." Kieran's silver eyes found hers again, and she felt something spark between them, recognition, admiration, and something deeper that made her phantom emotions stir restlessly. After the lecture, Celine was gathering her books when a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Kieran standing beside her, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his silver eyes. "Your questions about magical ethics weren't just intelligent, they were revolutionary," he said, his voice warm with genuine interest. "You challenged 3 centuries of magical law in one observation. Who taught you to think like this?" "No one taught me," Celine replied, surprised by her own honesty. "I'm learning who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else's perfect complement." Something shifted in Kieran's expression, as if her words had struck a chord he wasn't expecting. "Would you be interested in collaborating on some research? I'm working on magical channel rehabilitation theory, and your insights into systematic inefficiencies could be invaluable." The offer sent a thrill through her that had nothing to do with political advantage or personal ambition. This was pure intellectual curiosity, the excitement of ideas worth exploring for their own sake. "I'd like that very much," she said. Their first research session took place in the Academy's private study chambers, surrounded by ancient texts on magical theory and experimental data on channel damage. Celine found herself completely absorbed in the work, her strategic mind racing through implications and connections she had never been free to explore before. The traditional approach treats damaged channels as permanent limitations, Kieran explained, leaning over a diagram that showed magical pathways through the human body. But what if we're thinking about it wrong? What if damage can be redirected rather than healed? Like creating alternate pathways, Celine said, her excitement building. The magic finds new routes when the original channels are blocked. It wouldn't restore the original capacity, but it might allow for different applications. Exactly, Kieran said, and when he smiled, Celine felt her phantom emotions surge with warmth. When you speak about magic theory, your eyes light up like stars. It's mesmerizing. The comment caught her off guard, not because it was forward, but because it sounded like something someone had said to her before, in another life, another time. The phantom emotions were growing stronger in Kieran's presence, almost overwhelming in their intensity. I should go, she said suddenly, gathering her books with trembling hands. It's getting late. But as she reached for her final notebook, her hand brushed against Kieran's. The contact sent a shock through both of them that had nothing to do with static magic. The room filled with visible light as both their magical cores flared simultaneously, creating patterns that Professor Aldrich later described as impossible. Did you feel that? Kieran asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for you to touch me, Celine admitted, then immediately flushed at her own boldness. The moment was broken by Adrian's voice from the doorway. Celine, there you are. We need to discuss the upcoming diplomatic reception. She turned to see Adrian standing in the entrance, his expression cold as he took in the scene. The scattered research materials, the lingering magical resonance in the air, the way she and Kieran were still standing close together. Your Highness, she said formally, I'm in the middle of research collaboration with Duke Nightshade. Since when do you care about Nightshade's radical theories? Adrian's voice carried an edge she had never heard directed at her before. You're my strategic advisor, Celine. Your insights belong to projects that actually matter. The possessiveness in his tone sparked anger that surprised her with its intensity. My insights belong to me, she said coolly, and I choose to share them with research that interests me. Adrian's face went through several expressions before settling on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, how thoughtful of you to explore new interests, but surely you can spare time for more important matters. I'll consider it, Celine replied, not committing to anything. After Adrian left, clearly frustrated by her refusal to follow him immediately, Kieran studied her with those silver eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He's not used to you having your own agenda, Kieran observed. No, he's not, Celine said, and honestly, neither am I. As they walked back toward the dormitories together, Celine found herself battling internal contradictions that threatened to tear her apart. The intellectual connection with Kieran felt genuine, born from shared interests and mutual respect. But the phantom emotions, the instant recognition, the way her magic responded to his, all of that suggested forces beyond her control. Am I falling for Kieran because I choose to? She wondered silently. Or because some cosmic force is pushing me toward him? How do I know the difference? The question haunted her as she lay in bed that night, phantom emotions whispering of silver eyes and patient love, while her rational mind demanded to know whether any of this was truly her choice. 3 weeks into their research collaboration, Celine and Kieran had developed a theoretical framework that could revolutionize magical rehabilitation. Their work sessions had become the highlight of her days, filled with intellectual challenges and moments of connection that felt both entirely new and hauntingly familiar. But it was during their attempt to test the channel redirection theory that everything changed. The magical resonance chamber should allow us to observe channel behavior in real time, Professor Aldrich explained, adjusting the complex array of crystals surrounding the experimental platform. Since you both volunteered to demonstrate the theory, we'll start with a simple channel mapping exercise. Celine stepped onto the platform beside Kieran, acutely aware of his presence, even though they weren't touching. The resonance crystals began to glow, responding to their combined magical signatures in ways that made Professor Aldrich frown at his instruments. Interesting, he muttered. The resonance patterns are more complex than I expected. Let's try a basic magical demonstration. Nothing elaborate, just enough to trace your channel pathways. Celine began weaving a simple strategic spell, the kind she had performed thousands of times. But as her magic flowed through the chamber, something went catastrophically wrong. The experimental crystals overloaded, creating a feedback loop that threatened to destroy not just the equipment, but everyone in the room. The resonance is cascading, Professor Aldrich shouted over the rising magical chaos. Everyone out! But there was no time to evacuate. The magical energy was building toward a critical explosion that would level half the academy. In that moment of crisis, Celine and Kieran moved without conscious thought, their hands finding each other as they poured their combined magic into containing the disaster. What happened next defied every law of magical theory Celine had ever studied. Instead of their powers conflicting or requiring careful coordination, her strategic magic and Kieran's combat abilities merged into something entirely new. They weren't casting separate spells that worked together. They were wielding a single unified magical force that belonged to both and neither of them. A perfect magical marriage, Professor Aldrich would later write in his report. Two separate magical systems achieving complete harmonic unity. But for Celine and Kieran, lost in the moment of absolute magical connection, the external world disappeared. In that space where their powers merged completely, memories that belonged to neither and both of them flooded their consciousness. Celine saw herself in a dozen different lives, 100 different times, always finding Kieran and always losing him. In one timeline, they were childhood friends separated by war. In another, they were scholars whose research was destroyed by political upheaval. Again and again, they found each other, loved each other, and were torn apart by forces beyond their control. "We've loved each other across lifetimes, haven't we?" Kieran whispered as the magical chaos settled around them, his voice thick with the weight of remembered loss. "I can feel every goodbye we've ever said." "How many times have we been denied this happiness?" Celine cried, overwhelmed by the accumulated grief of a dozen tragic endings. The phantom emotions weren't foreign. They were the collected love and loss of every timeline where they had been kept apart. "I've been searching for you my entire life without knowing what I was looking for," Kieran said, his hands still clasped with hers even though the immediate danger had passed. "Now I understand. It was always you." The revelation should have been romantic, the answer to every question about destiny and true love. Instead, it filled Celine with a terror that cut deeper than any physical threat. She pulled away from Kieran's touch, stumbling backward as the implications crashed over her. "But if our love is written in the stars, Kieran, then what part of it is truly ours to choose?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "If loving you is my fate, then am I really choosing you, or am I just as trapped as I was with Adrian?" "Celine? No, don't you see?" She was spiraling now, everything she had learned about self-worth and authentic choice crumbling under the weight of cosmic predestination. "I spent my entire first life defining myself through someone else's needs. I died because I couldn't exist as my own person. And now I find out that this connection with you, might just be another form of the same trap." Kieran's face went pale as he understood her fear. "You think our feelings aren't real because they're destined?" "I don't know what's real anymore," Celine admitted, tears streaming down her face. "The phantom emotions, the instant recognition, the way our magic merged. How much of that is us choosing each other, and how much is the universe pulling our strings?" "Does it matter?" Kieran asked desperately. "If we love each other, if we make each other better, if we're happy together, does the origin of that love diminish its value?" "It mattered when Adrian said I worshipped the idea of him instead of loving the real person," Celine shot back. "How do I know I'm not doing the same thing with you? How do I know you're not just loving some cosmic idea of who I'm supposed to be?" The argument was interrupted by Adrian's arrival, drawn by reports of the magical accident. He took in the scene, the destroyed resonance chamber, Selene's tears, the lingering magical harmony between her and Kieran, and his expression hardened. I heard there was an emergency, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Are you injured, Selene? I'm fine, she said, though she was anything but fine. Good, because I need to speak with you privately. Adrian's gaze moved to Kieran with barely concealed hostility. About matters that concern the kingdom's actual interests, not theoretical academic pursuits. Whatever you need to say can be said here, Selene replied, not moving toward Adrian despite his obvious expectation that she would. Very well. Adrian straightened into his most princely posture. The diplomatic corps has requested your strategic insights for the upcoming negotiations with Valdris. Your reputation as a brilliant political mind precedes you, and they specifically asked for Lady Selene Ashworth's analysis. The appeal to her intellectual abilities was calculated to remind her of her value in his world, but it only highlighted how little he understood her transformation. In her first life, such recognition would have sent her running to his side, grateful for the acknowledgement. Now, it felt like manipulation. I'll consider it, she said noncommittally. Adrian's careful composure cracked slightly. You'll consider it? Selene, this is your duty to the kingdom. Your place is supporting vital diplomatic efforts, not playing with academic theories that will never benefit anyone. My place, Selene said, her voice dangerously quiet, is wherever I choose it to be. This is ridiculous, Adrian exploded, his royal mask falling away completely. Lady Selene belongs with someone who can match her devotion, not someone who sees her as an intellectual curiosity. I know you, Selene. I know what you need, what you want. You know what I used to be, Selene corrected. You never knew who I actually was, and you certainly don't know who I'm becoming. After Adrian left in frustrated defeat, Selene found herself alone with Kieran in the ruins of the resonance chamber. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unresolved questions about choice and destiny. In every timeline, something kept us apart, Kieran said quietly. War, politics, death, duty. There was always some external force stronger than our love. In this one, the only thing that can separate us is you. That's not fair, Selene whispered. No, it's not, Kieran agreed. But it's true. I can't make you believe our love is real. I can't prove that destiny and choice aren't mutually exclusive. All I can do is tell you that when I look at you, I see not some cosmic ideal, but a brilliant, complicated, fierce woman who challenges everything I thought I knew about magic and politics and love. And what if you're wrong? What if the cosmic connection is all there is? Then we'll find out together, Kieran said simply. But running away because you're afraid of being manipulated by fate, isn't that just another way of letting fear control your choices? The question hit home with brutal accuracy. Selene had spent her first life afraid of not being enough, and now she was spending her second life afraid of not being authentic. In both cases, fear was making her decisions for her. I need time, she said finally. Take all the time you need, Kieran replied. I've waited for you across lifetimes. I can wait a little longer for you to decide if this is what you truly want. As Selene walked back to her dormitory, she carried the weight of an impossible choice. Risk loving someone who might be destined for her, or abandon the possibility of happiness because she couldn't be certain it was entirely her own choice. The phantom emotions whispered of silver eyes and patient love, but for the first time, she wondered if listening to them was wisdom or surrender. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong came during Professor Aldrich's advanced magical theory class, 3 months after Selene had begun avoiding Kieran. The Academy's protective ward stones, which had maintained perfect stability for centuries, began flickering like dying candles. When students tried to cast even basic spells, their magic sparked erratically, creating unpredictable results that left scorch marks on classroom walls. The magical foundation itself is becoming unstable, Professor Aldrich announced to his gathered colleagues, His usually calm demeanor cracked with genuine fear. "I've detected what can only be described as reality tears, places where the fundamental laws governing magic are unraveling." Celine felt ice in her veins as she listened from the back of the faculty meeting she had no right to attend. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. The magical disruptions had begun shortly after she started pulling away from Kieran, fighting against the cosmic connection that felt too much like predestination. "How is such a thing possible?" asked Professor Whitmore, his voice tight with concern. "Disrupted cosmic destinies don't just affect individuals," Professor Aldrich replied grimly. "They can unravel existence itself when souls meant to be connected are forced apart by unnatural means. The magical framework that holds reality together begins to crack." After the meeting, Selene cornered Professor Aldrich in his office, her hands shaking as she confronted the terrible possibility that her personal choices were destroying everything around her. "The reality tears," she said without preamble. "They started when I began avoiding Duke Nightshade, didn't they?" Professor Aldrich's expression was grave as he nodded. "Your magical signatures are fundamentally intertwined across multiple dimensional layers. Fighting that connection is like trying to separate woven threads by force. Eventually, the entire fabric tears. The kingdom's magical foundation is cracking because I chose love over duty," Celine whispered, sinking into a chair as the full horror of the situation hit her. "How many people will die for my happiness?" "That's not," Professor Aldrich started, then stopped. "The situation is more complex than simple cause and effect, Lady Celine. But yes, your resistance to the cosmic connection is contributing to the instability." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the office windows, they could see students fleeing across the academy courtyard as something that looked like a tear in the air itself opened near the library. Through the dimensional gap, shadowy figures in Valdris Empire uniforms were attempting to push through. "Enemy mages," Professor Aldrich breathed. "They're using the reality tiers as invasion routes." The next few hours were chaos. Academy mages worked frantically to seal the dimensional breaches while students were evacuated to safer locations. But for every tier they closed, 2 more opened elsewhere. It was during this crisis that Lady Vivian appeared, her once pure, magical aura now shot through with veins of corrupted darkness. "You," she said, confronting Celine in the Academy's main hall while magical alarms wailed around them. "You stole my purpose, my place in the grand design. I was meant to stand beside Adrian, to use my healing magic to support his rule and bring peace to the kingdom, but your selfish pursuit of a love that was never meant to be has poisoned everything." Vivian's corrupted magic lashed out, turning healing spells into weapons that burned rather than mended. "Now watch as everything beautiful turns to ash because of your selfish love." "Vivian, stop!" Adrian appeared, having rushed to the academy when reports of the invasion reached the palace. "This isn't you. Your magic. What's happened to it?" "What's happened?" Vivian snarled. "Is that cosmic order has been disrupted by someone who refuses to accept her place in the grand design. My healing magic was meant to flow in harmony with destiny, but when that harmony was broken, it inverted. Now I can only destroy what I was meant to preserve." The battle was brief but devastating. Vivian's corrupted magic proved too powerful for the Academy's defenses, and it was only Kieran's unexpected arrival that prevented catastrophic casualties. His combat magic, enhanced by the lingering resonance of his connection to Celine, managed to contain Vivian's attack long enough for her to exhaust herself. "Sister, your magic is tearing holes in reality," Darius said, finding Celine in the aftermath as she knelt beside unconscious students who had been caught in Vivian's assault. "Whatever you've awakened, it's bigger than all of us." "I know," Celine said, her voice hollow. "I know, and I don't know how to fix it." That night, as the Academy struggled to repair the damage and seal the remaining reality tiers, Kieran found Selene on the astronomy tower where she had gone to think. The weight of responsibility sat on her shoulders like a physical burden, and she couldn't bring herself to look at him. The professors think they can temporarily stabilize the tiers using conventional magical techniques, he said quietly. But it's just a patch job. The fundamental problem remains. I need the strategist you always were, not the woman you've become. Adrian had pleaded with her earlier that evening, his princely mask completely gone in the face of national crisis. The words echoed in her mind now, a cruel reminder that her transformation was costing more than just her own peace. If our happiness costs thousands of lives, then perhaps some loves are too dangerous to pursue. Kieran continued, his voice carefully steady. I'm prepared to leave, Selene, to go far enough away that our connection can't affect the kingdom's magical stability. You think I would let you sacrifice yourself again? Selene turned to face him, fury blazing in her eyes. Never. I've seen what happens when people sacrifice themselves for the supposed greater good. It solves nothing and destroys everyone involved. Then what do you propose? The reality tiers are getting worse. Valdris mages are using them to infiltrate deeper into the kingdom. Vivian's magic is becoming more corrupted by the day. Something has to change. I refuse to believe that my suffering was the price for everyone else's peace, Selene said fiercely. There has to be another way, a solution that doesn't require anyone to sacrifice their authentic self for cosmic order. And if there isn't, then we'll create one, she declared. I didn't survive death and rebirth just to choose between love and duty again. There has to be a third option, a way to have both without destroying everything I care about. Kieran studied her face in the moonlight, seeing the determination that had first attracted him to her brilliant mind. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that if our connection is strong enough to tear reality apart, maybe it's also strong enough to hold reality together, Selene said, the beginnings of an idea forming. Professor Aldrich said our magical signatures are intertwined across dimensional layers. What if instead of fighting that connection, we used it intentionally? That's incredibly dangerous, Kieran warned. Binding magical cores permanently across multiple dimensions. The magical cost alone could kill us both. Maybe, Selene agreed. But if we don't try, the kingdom falls anyway. At least this way. We face the risk together, by choice, instead of being manipulated by cosmic forces. As they stood together on the tower, looking out over an academy scarred by reality tears and a kingdom threatened by invasion, Selene felt something shift inside her. The phantom emotions were still there, still whispering of destined love and cosmic connection. But now they felt like part of her rather than external pressure. She was choosing to embrace them, choosing to work with destiny rather than against it. We'll need to convince Professor Aldrich to help us, she said. And we'll need Adrian and even Vivian to understand what we're attempting. You're proposing to save everyone, Kieran observed. Even the people who hurt you. I'm proposing to save everyone, Selene confirmed, because that's who I choose to be. Not because fate demands it, not because duty requires it, but because it's the right thing to do. The decision felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. She was no longer running from destiny or surrendering to it. She was taking control of it, reshaping it into something she could live with. The phantom emotions sang with approval, but more importantly, her own heart felt at peace for the first time since her rebirth. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Valdris Empire forces had used the reality tiers to establish multiple beachheads within the kingdom's borders, and conventional military responses were failing because the enemy could retreat through dimensional gaps whenever pressed. The crisis had moved beyond magical theory into immediate existential threat. We won't just accept our fate, Selene announced to the assembled group in Professor Aldrich's laboratory. Kieran, Adrian, Darius, Professor Aldrich, and even a chastened Vivian whose corrupted magic had stabilized somewhat overnight. We'll rewrite the rules of destiny itself, together. That's not how cosmic forces work, Professor Aldrich protested. Destiny isn't something you can negotiate with or redesign. It simply is. Then we'll prove you wrong? Celine replied with calm certainty. Kieran and I will attempt a permanent magical binding across all dimensional layers. Instead of letting our connection tear reality apart, we'll use it to reinforce the magical framework that holds everything together. The magical cost, Adrian started, will be significant, Celine acknowledged, but manageable if we're not fighting against the cosmic connection anymore. The phantom emotions, the timeline memories, the way our magic harmonizes, all of that has been trying to tell us something. We've been meant to work together, not just love together. Vivian, her corruption-scarred face showing the first genuine emotion she'd displayed in months, spoke up. And what about those of us whose destinies you've disrupted? What about the roles we were meant to play? Celine turned to face her former rival with compassion rather than anger. You get to choose who you want to be now. Your healing magic was corrupted because you were trying to force it into a mold that no longer fit. But corruption can be reversed, Vivian. You can decide what your power is meant to do. The magical working they designed over the next 3 days was unlike anything in recorded history. It required not just Celine and Kieran's combined power, but the willing participation of everyone whose destiny had been affected by the timeline disruption. If destiny wants to use our love as a weapon, Selene declared as they prepared the ritual circle, then we'll make it a weapon that saves rather than destroys. The ceremony took place at sunset in the Academy's Great Hall, with reality tears flickering ominously around the edges of their protective wards. As Celine and Kieran stepped into the central circle, their magic began to resonate with increasing intensity. In every possible future, I choose you, Kieran whispered as their power merged, but this time instead of creating chaos, it began knitting the torn fabric of reality back together. The binding process was excruciating. Celine felt her consciousness expand across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, experiencing every possible version of herself and Kieran loving, losing, and finding each other again. But instead of overwhelming her, the experience felt like coming home to herself completely. Our love isn't just ours anymore, Kieran, she gasped as the magical working reached its crescendo. It's become the foundation that holds reality together. The moment of completion was marked not by dramatic light shows or explosive magic, but by a profound sense of rightness settling over everything. The reality tears sealed themselves. Vivian's corrupted magic purified into something new and uniquely hers, and the phantom emotions that had plagued Celine finally integrated completely with her authentic self. I finally understand what I lost when I couldn't see who you really were, Adrian said afterward, approaching Celine with genuine warmth rather than possessiveness. I'm happy you found someone who sees all of you. I forgive you, Celine replied, and meant it completely. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to that pain would poison the love I've found. Adrian's smile was rueful but genuine. I think I'm learning what real love looks like, watching you too. It's not about possession or worship. It's about choosing to grow together. Yes, Vivian said quietly, her hand finding Adrian's as her magic, no longer pure healing, but something more complex and her own, settled into new patterns. It's about accepting someone completely, including their capacity to surprise you. 6 months later, Celine stood at the altar of the royal chapel, wearing a gown that was beautiful without being designed to please anyone but herself. As she looked out at the assembled guests, her brother Darius beaming with pride, Adrian and Vivian sitting together as genuinely happy friends, Professor Aldrich dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. She felt the profound satisfaction of having become exactly who she was meant to be. I am not treasured because I am loved, she realized as Kieran took her hands, silver eyes bright with joy. I am loved because I learned to treasure myself. Do you, Celine Ashworth, take this man to be your husband, to have and to hold through all the timelines and dimensions that may come? I do, she said, her voice carrying across the chapel with absolute certainty. In this life and every other, I choose him freely. The years that followed proved that love chosen rather than destined was indeed stronger than any cosmic force. Celine and Kieran became the kingdom's magical guardians, their bound power maintaining the reality framework while they pursued their research, raised children who knew they were loved for who they were rather than who they might become, and built institutions that valued merit over birthright. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they stood in their private study surrounded by research that had revolutionized magical education throughout the known world, Kieran asked the question that had been on his mind since their wedding night. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met in that first timeline? Celine looked up from the letter she was writing to a young noble girl who had asked her advice about pursuing magical research instead of marriage, and smiled with the contentment of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. No, my love, she said, setting down her quill and moving to join him at the window overlooking the academy where their story had truly begun. Because then I wouldn't have learned what it means to choose you with my whole heart, scars and all. This version of our love, earned, tested, and chosen, this is the one worth fighting fate for. Outside their window, reality hummed with perfect stability, held together by love that had transformed from cosmic compulsion into conscious choice. In choosing each other freely, they had not only rewritten their own destiny, but created space for everyone around them to author their own stories. It was, Selene reflected as Kieran's arms encircled her waist, exactly the ending she would have written for herself, if she had been brave enough to believe she deserved it. What would you do if given a second chance after being discarded like trash? Would you choose revenge, love, or rewriting destiny itself? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Selene's journey from devoted shadow to empowered queen, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic manhwa stories where broken hearts become unbreakable crowns.